Okay, good evening to everyone. It's what 6:05 in the evening here in the UK. Fair bit to talk about this evening. Fair bit to talk about. Obviously, we're in the FIFA international qualifiers and friendlies. Obviously, Wales, Northern Ireland, and the Republic of Ireland, from a British Isles standpoint, have all been knocked out of the qualifying playoffs for this summer's World Cup. It's a bit unfortunate, but at the same time, at the moment, they're not at the level I think where other nations are at in Europe. I think Craig Bellamy's doing a very, very good job with the Welsh setup, however, and they've had a very good record since he's been manager of Wales. So I think props to Craig Bellamy for getting them to where they are. I still think they're a ways off from where they would like to be, but I think he's done a good job. I was a bit dubious when he was first appointed by the Welsh FA to, take over with his, I wouldn't say lack of experience, but limited experience at senior level as a coach. But he's done a good job so far. I think there's still a lot of players, young players, involved with the first team and in the conversation for the first team. And there's still improvements to be made there, and players are still developing. So, in the post Gareth Bale and Aaron Ramsey era, I think the future looks bright for Wales. Northern Ireland, with their player base, I mean, that's getting that close to qualifying for a World Cup. I think is a big achievement as things stand with their smaller player base, less funding. The Republic of Ireland have been disappointing for some time in regards to international football. So make of that what you will, but football is not the most popular sport in the Republic. So there's a reason why they don't qualify as often as I think they should, with smaller nations population-wise doing better than them. Obviously, in rugby league news, we've heard about the ongoing discussions over potential NRL investment in Super League and rugby league over here in the UK. Very interesting how that's going to play out. Talks are still ongoing. I expect a final announcement around when the Challenge Cup final is in May, so in a couple months' time, and we'll see what gets announced and if the RFL and Super League and the NRL and Australian Rugby League Commission come to some kind of contractual agreement, and we'll see what plays out. I think there's a lot of moving parts at play there. It should be very, very interesting to see how that plays out. But time will tell what deal is thrashed out between the various interested parties. I do think the plan to reduce the size of Super League to 10 teams is not a good plan if you want to get a better TV deal, personally. I think expansion probably is the way to go, but we'll see what the NRL and RFL and Super League agree in the end. I think club chairman will have to give up a lot of power. Too much self-interest for individual concerns. Put the sport first over personal interests. Golf news. I didn't think I'll be talking about this. Tiger Woods has been arrested for yet another driving under the influence charge. He managed to flip his Range Rover outside his home in Florida. This is not his first DUI charge. I think it's his third or fourth he's had since 2009. A bit of a fall from grace for Tiger Woods since his extramarital affairs blew up in the media in about a decade and a half ago, early 2010, 2011. His private life has spiraled. He's had four DUIs now. I think his reputation is definitely severely damaged from where it was pre-2009 with his first DUI incident. And driving under the influence does not necessarily mean alcohol, so you've got to bear that in mind. But he's had, I think, 4 DUI charges now. We'll see what happens in court, and we'll see how lengthy a driving ban he actually gets. But that's quite a interesting. I mean, golf as a sport's got some characters in it, and a lot of them do have some very colourful private lives and antics away from the course. So I'd be interested to see what happens with Tiger Woods, but he has been charged with a DUI down in Florida. Footballing news is just footballing news, really. But yes, we've got some big rugby league news. Anthony Seibold getting sacked by the Sea Eagles and replaced on an interim basis by Kieran Foran. We'll see how that plays out on the northern beaches of Sydney. Good evening, good evening, good evening. All right, what have we got here? I hope everyone is okay. But yeah, they're the major sports headlines at the moment. Obviously, the NBA is very keen on expansion from 30 to 32 teams. They're looking at Vegas, they're looking at Seattle. They're going to be announced in due course as future expansion teams for the NBA. The NHL, I think. I'm going to do another video on this, but I do think the NHL expands before 2030 when the CBA expires. And I expect an announcement soon. Basically, Houston and Atlanta, I think, are the two cities that are going to get announced as the next wave of expansion. But I do think we will reach 36 teams announced and the process starting before 2030. I know that there are others who disagree with that and say NHL expansion won't happen until after the next CBA is announced or negotiated. But I think the process starts before the end of the current collective bargaining agreement. Major League Baseball's season has now begun. It could be the last opening day we actually see for a while. All reports suggest a lockout is going to be a certainty. The owners want a salary cap, the players don't. I don't think all the players are unified in that. They still don't have a full-time union leader in the Major League Baseball Players Association. There's been a few things going on off the field with Major League Baseball. The TV deal, local networks are struggling, and some teams are making a lot less money than they were before. So that's going to be very, very interesting how that all plays out. I think as the year and the season progresses, I think we'll see more discussion around the collective bargaining agreement and whether one can be reached. But I think we're going to see a delayed start to the 2027 season if we actually get a season at all. It could be very similar to 94-95. I think we could see a long stoppage with Major League Baseball. And bearing in mind in 2028, they want to have baseball at the Olympics. And obviously we saw the World Baseball Classic where the US team, well, they made the final. They lost to Venezuela. They lost to Italy, although admittedly, I think all of the Italian players are American born or been in the Americas since they were children. And a lot of them have played in the major leagues. But the US, I think, underperformed for the talent of squad they had available. And Aaron Judge didn't perform very well. Yeah, I think Major League Baseball is in a situation where they are the only. I'm just going to get another drink and set. They're the only major league without some form of salary cap. They just have a luxury tax system. There is no salary floor. There's a great imbalance in spending. You could argue if the Blue Jays had won the World Series at the end of last season, the conversation around spending would be slightly different. The local TV deal issues are well documented. Is it Broad Street Media who have the local right? Basically, what was Bally Sports, which became FanDuel Sports. The parent company, that's just a branding thing with basically by a sponsorship thing, but the company that runs it, I'm going to have to, it's something, I think, is it Broad Street Media or something like that, or Main Street Media. They took over what was the Diamond Sports Network, which was once the Fox Sport affiliates. So there's been a lot of naming changes, a lot of ownership changes. There's been a couple of, basically, I wouldn't say liquidations, but bankruptcy protection, massive losses. The viewing habits have changed, but it impacts Major League Baseball, I think, more than the NBA and the NHL. What is interesting, the NFL, for example, and even Major League Soccer, they don't have local affiliate broadcasting negotiations in regards to the media rights, the TV deal or streaming deals. They have national deals. And also all these leagues have international deals as well, but they have national deals in the US. Obviously in Canada, the NHL has a strong national deal and a strong regional deal with TSN and Rogers, but south of border, the NHL is less reliant on the local TV stations. Major League Baseball and the NBA are more heavily reliant on local broadcasters for the regional broadcasts, and with them struggling a lot and several pulling out of the market altogether, it does hurt finances. So that is something to note. I think it's something to note. I think it's another implication as why Major League Baseball, the owners, are seeing their revenues being impacted. Now, some individual teams have their own streaming partners and their own broadcast deals that they strike themselves. Like Dodgers and the Yankees, for example, have really strong streaming, their own basically TV companies that they own, so they can concentrate on their market. But there'll be other teams that don't have that kind of local media presence, where they are relying on the local regional broadcasters. And like Main Street Media don't own all of them, but they have a massive bearing on a lot of the major leagues, and their financial struggles are impacting the profit margins of teams. And I think that's another reason why a salary cap is going to be forced upon Major League Baseball. Now, we could see some players decide, you could argue they're going to try and take a restraint of trade action. But because the other major leagues have salary caps in place, I can't see them being successful with a restraint of trade civil suit. So we'll see what happens. I'm just going to get another relent line. 65p cheaper than a sugar-free Monster, so I went with inflation busting, which I think is crucial. My recycling is outside. Nice and chilled. I should really get an ice bucket for these, or a little mini fridge, so I don't have to go to the kitchen, but we have a nice chilled original Relentless flavour. Not keen on Relentless, but the price makes it taste better because it's cheaper. Not overly keen. I mean, that just tastes like Monster, but it's Relentless. But yes, so that's Major League Baseball. I think the NBA, I think their solution, the NBA's solution to making less revenue is expansion. And basically, it's a poorly kept secret that it's going to be Seattle, it's going to be Las Vegas, basically in reverse. So they're basically copying the NHL with their last two expansion locations. Both cities have arenas that are available that you can set up for basketball. Obviously, with Seattle, they would share the building with the Kraken, and most likely, although there's the possibility that if Vegas does come in, that a new arena does get built in Las Vegas, but they could share T-Mobile with the Golden Knights, and it could work. So I think the NBA's solution to financial, I wouldn't say difficulty, they're still making money, but they're making less money than projected at the last CBA because of the regional sports broadcasters struggling in local markets, is expansion. Now, the expansion fee is an interesting one. The NHL are looking at around 1 to 2 billion for the next expansion franchises when they come in. The NBA is looking at 7 to 10. So make of that what you will. Yeah, well, look, you could argue our form of football, association football, you could argue that, yes, I mean, I've done a video many years ago, actually, about putting a salary cap in European football. And recently I got some views on that. Now, I made that video back, was it 2019, 2020? I think it was 2020 during COVID. I would say about April time, about a month into lockdown, maybe 6 weeks just before the Rule of Six was brought in. I remember doing the video. I think it was mid to late April. I did a video in 2020 about my point of view on should European football bring in a salary cap, and this was coming at the time not long after Neymar's transfer to PSG, about a couple of years after. The Newcastle United sale was ongoing. We were seeing some big transfer fees at the time and player wages. And then suddenly it all comes to a screeching halt. And then these big clubs that were basically saying, well, look, we're profitable. We can make money hand over fist. We can let the fans in for exceptionally low amounts, but we choose not to. We choose to. Suddenly we're losing money hand over fist. I think we've moved on a bit. We've seen the threat of a European Super League. We've seen the European club competitions, the formats change. Look how many games players are playing per season. Obviously, what's happened with Chelsea, these points deductions under PSR, we've seen the last couple of seasons that have had an impact on the Premier League table, the Championship table, etc., etc. And now with what's happening with Man City and what's recently happened with Chelsea, I think there's not enough financial transparency. I think that's clear. We have seen obviously the manipulation of the books, and go back a decade before COVID. I think it was in 2018. The Premier League clubs at the time said, "Look, they even admitted they could let us in for £10 or less and still make massive profits." And half the league could have let us in for free and still made massive profits, in part because of the media rights deal, and then also concessions. So that's when you go to the club shop or the club website and buy your merchandise, etc. They basically admitted they could let us in for next to nothing. And then COVID hits, and then suddenly they've got no money. So there's got to be questions over the financial state of the game, where the money's gone, how the money's spent. Look at Chelsea, for example, and their workarounds around PSR. Whereas other clubs that have got wealthy owners are trying to stay PSR compliant. I think it's a better system than the former financial fair play, but it's still flawed. And then you look at the Man City situation, which has just been going on and on and on and been dragged out through delaying tactics and litigation. And I find it interesting how the Premier League is punishing clubs. The big six are like a protected species. You could argue on a PR standpoint, it'd be a bad look for the league in regards that basically there's been some form of, I wouldn't say criminality necessarily, but rule breaches by the big six. But the rule breaches, when they happen with slightly lesser clubs. I hate that. I hate the way that the big. It's ridiculous. I mean, look, yeah, Man United, Chelsea. Chelsea have never made any money, by the way. They haven't been profitable for a long, long time. They're relying on the owners' deep pockets. Tottenham, out of the so-called big six, I think the financial aspect, Man City have started to turn a profit, but they were losing money for a long, long time. Arsenal, out of the big six, are the most financially sound. And in part, it was the paying off of the Emirates for so long and their more constrained transfer policy when Wenger was in the second half of Wenger's time in charge. Now, yes, they haven't won the league for a long time, but they've managed to win trophies here or there and make finals here or there. They've been a lot, obviously, less successful, but they were financially constraining themselves. They paid off the stadium. I would say Arsenal are probably the only big six club that are truly PSR compliant or financially fair play compliant under the old rules. A lot of the other clubs are not. And how you can announce you've lost like £1 billion, or you're £1 billion into deficit, or I think Chelsea's the second biggest operating loss by a football club ever, and it's the biggest in our country over the last, I think, 12 or 24 months. Yeah, somehow they're PSR. But I don't. This is where I think there's a growing disconnect between the footballing authorities and fans. It's not working. It's not a level playing field. Now, in regards to going back to a salary cap, it's going to be interesting because I was watching a podcast and listening to a podcast last night. I only just stumbled across this guy. He's an American. He's an ex-NFL commentator. He does work he has worked in some of the major networks I forget his name. It's going to annoy me, but he has a couple of channels where he talks about sport. And obviously his insight's different. The NFL, the last Super Bowl, Roger Goodell obviously had all the TV execs and streaming company execs. Those that have already got deals with the NFL and those that want to have deals with the NFL. Now, as I said, the NFL is different to the other major leagues in North America because it doesn't have regional sports broadcasters as part of the media rights agreement. And it does national deals. You could also argue that the lack of games in a season, I think, helps the NFL strike these deals quite well. Every broadcast is a national broadcast in the US. That's not including their overseas broadcast rights, which is also very, very interesting. They could double. They could double. From reports being suggested, they're going to double their broadcast revenue when the new TV deal is signed in 2029. Now, this is where I think the NBA and the NHL get their expansion moves started before the NFL, and the money disappears, signs their next broadcast rights deal. They want to get in there while they can before the broadcasters sign up and spend their money. So I think the expansion process starts in the NHL, starts in the NBA before their CBAs expire. I think the NHL was probably, they were already having in-depth discussions with teams. I think they know the locations they're going to choose. And there we go. The NFL expansion, I think we may see it with the amount of overseas games the NFL is now playing. They're going to be playing in Australia next season, for example. I think their opening game of next season is actually in Australia. I can't remember if it's Melbourne or Sydney, but they're playing a game in a regular season game in Australia. Bearing in mind, the NHL's already been there. I think the NBA's already been there as well. I think Major League Baseball's played some games, but other major leagues have been and played pre-season and regular season games in Australia. They want to hit that market. It's a sports market. I think the NFL does expand at some point. Now, whether we get like a 40-team NFL, how you would work that out with conferences and divisions, I don't know. I think that's there, but the expansion fee would be ridiculous. Absolutely, the expansion fee would be ridiculous. It really would. If the NBA are asking 7 to 10 billion, which I find ridiculous for an expansion fee, the NHL looking at between 1 and 2 billion. You have to imagine what the NFL expansion fee would be. But there's been talk over the last 20 years of having a London-based team. So the expansion talk has been there, but I think nothing happens right now. I think with the global series growing as it has done, it's made the NFL a lot of money. Now, whether all the US fans, domestic fans in the US, are happy with the fact they only have a limited number of home games and a limited number of away games, you have a very limited length of regular season and playoffs. Whether domestic fans in the US are happy, and even to a certain extent Canadians, there's a lot of Canadians that go to Buffalo games and Seattle games, and Patriots games and Green Bay games. They just have to go across the border and they can watch a game for those locations near the Canadian border. Whether North American fans are actually happy that the amount of regular season games that are classed as global series games, like coming to London, which has been very successful for the NFL. It's brought a lot of money into the local economy, not just in London, but in the UK, but particularly the Southeast, but the UK in general as well. There was talk about London getting an NFL franchise. I think there still is a discussion surrounding that, or a franchise in Europe, or franchises in Europe. There's been talk of a European division at points. Whether that happens under Roger Goodell with expansion in North America or expansion in Europe will be very interesting. I'm not saying it won't happen, but with the current politics in the US, with foreign policy and tariffs, currency exchange, logistics, it's already a logistical challenge for the global series games. Imagine having an eight game homestand. How would you do the scheduling in regards to home and away and travel, playoffs. There's been talk of a Super Bowl being held in London, for example, in recent years, or being a proposal. So I think it's an 18-game season now. It's not 16. I think it's 18 games they want now in the season. So if you expand the season, yeah, okay, you could potentially expand the league, but then the CFL, the Canadian equivalent, in the 90s into the 2000s, expanded into the US, and it destroyed the league. So you've got to be careful what you wish for. Expansion doesn't necessarily always work as intended. Look, we're having the same discussions with the NRL. Now, obviously, next season, the Perth Bears come into the competition, then PNG coming in 2028. And that will make an even team league, then an odd team league. And then there's the discussion of, should New Zealand get a second team? I've got to do a video on that, another video on that. I've done several videos on New Zealand potentially getting a second team. So I don't think every team's played in London yet in the global series in the NFL. And we could argue that is expansion good for the sport, or any sport growing, I think there's a point where you do limit yourselves for fan base and player base. There's only so far you can push something before you get market saturation and fans actually go, this is a lesser product. I think it's a good way of. Oh, what a tough moustache there. Well, there's a lot of collegiate players that miss out on the NFL. So that's what the practice squad's for. So there's enough athletes, I think you could say, that could play NFL. There's enough money in the NFL's a license to print money. It is a profitable league. I think all the franchises, while some are struggling on the field and may not make as much money as others, and Green Bay is obviously the smallest major league market in North America, you could argue expansion could work. There are enough collegiate players. Whether that would hurt the CFL north of the border, that'd be very, very interesting. And of course, the CFL makes significantly less money. But if the Major League Baseball goes on a lockout next year, the CFL season is when the Major League Baseball season takes place. You have the Blue Jays in Toronto, so that would help the Argonauts. And of course, there's growing calls to have a team back in Montreal, like a return of the Expos. There are baseball fans north of the border. There are NFL fans north of the border. So if Major League Baseball was to, I think it will be in a lockout for next season. That could help the CFL, because there are baseball fans that also follow American football who may not like ice hockey or MLS or other leagues, and they're going to be like without a sport to watch. The CFL saw, when we've seen lockouts with the NHL, a boost in viewership and a boost in fans and attendance, which helped them, which ultimately led to their flawed expansion into the US. They felt they actually had more oomph because another rival league was in a lockout. They saw a boost in viewership. Same with the player strike in Major League Baseball, and it gave the CFL a false narrative of how strong their league was doing. And I've done a video comparing the CFL to the NFL, but again, during the first COVID lockdown in April 2020. I mean, I remember doing that video. I did a lot of research on the finance side of things and the average salaries and the income and losses and how the teams were doing financially, and the struggles of the CFL financially in the last 2 decades, following their brave and misguided expansion into the US, which actually hurt the league. But I think the NFL expanding, I think there's enough talent there from the collegiate NCAA to fill rosters. There's enough players. Because there's no minor league affiliate. I think the closest thing to a minor league affiliate is the CFL. So you could argue that the NFL could expand. I can't understand why you don't have a minor league affiliate structure like the other major leagues do. I think that is a head scratcher to me. I think that would be exceptionally popular with fandom and viewership. You could argue with the changes to NCAA rules that the collegiate system is the minor league affiliate system. But it does surprise me that there isn't, the major league, which is the NFL, a minor league a level below that, and then collegiate level. That does surprise me with American football. Same with Canadian football with the CFL, that there isn't a minor league affiliate system, but that's how it's working in North America. You can argue the pros and cons of that. But a lot of collegiate players that miss out on NFL roster spots do play in the CFL. They're willing to take less money. Look, the NCAA collegiate, the collegiate NCAA, especially college football, is the second most viewed sporting, I wouldn't say code, but the second most viewed sports. Well, I'm going to call it a league, but even though it isn't. After the NFL, it comes in above the other major leagues. And the viewership, his average viewership is like, I'm trying to think of it's like the population, the average viewership on a broadcast is the equivalent to the city of Toronto or the metro of Chicago. That's what the average viewership for a collegiate game is on broadcasters in the US. So they're big cities, by the way. So the biggest city in Canada or the third biggest city in the US population with their metros and suburbs is the average viewership for an NCAA collegiate game. Let that sink in. That is ridiculous. And now, yes, you can argue that just the NCAA, even collegiate basketball and collegiate baseball, the collegiate ice hockey's got improved viewership and fans and attendance. So there's the NCAA. I mean, this is the difference between the US and the rest of the sporting world is their collegiate structure. If you are an athlete, 9 times out of 10, there isn't like an academy system like we have here in Europe with sports teams. You have to go to university. They obviously have the draft system. So the NCAA, it doesn't matter what the sport is, the viewership of the NCAA is ridiculous. Even discounting the American football, just any sport that's NCAA affiliated, that you have universities in the NCAA system, the viewership's ridiculous. Doesn't matter if it's even like a smaller university with a smaller campus in a smaller city. The viewership is ridiculous. But that's the player development system in a lot of sports. You could argue it's like a pay to play because the amount of collegiate debt. I mean, a lot of NCAA athletes are there on scholarship, but a lot aren't. You look at student debt and how many of them don't make it. There are a fair few. If it's ice hockey, for example, or baseball you can play in like Korea, Japan, and make or Philippines make a decent living. If it's like ice hockey, a lot of the NCAA players that don't make it into the NHL or affiliate systems who do get drafted end up playing in Europe. They can earn some decent money. A fair few of them are Canadian as well. But when it comes to American football, if you don't make it, other than the CFL, there isn't really a sustainable historical league to go to. Arena football was, and then the other various, flash. I'm going to call them flash leagues that pop up like the XFL. Don't hang around very long. They're not very sustainable. There's no sustainable league to go to. So if you're an American football player and you've gone to college and you've played in the NCAA, the Rose Bowl or the Gator Bowl or whatever major college you've gone to at any level in the NCAA, Division 1, Division 2, whatever, and you don't make it to the NFL, and you want to pursue a career in sports, there's a problem. And I think that's the bigger issue with the NCAA system. The big issue. And you could argue, yeah, it's the club system, it's the development system a little bit. It's very, very rare that a player. Ice hockey's a bit different, and baseball you could argue is a bit different, but American football, which definitely you have to go through the NCAA to make it to the NFL. But I also think it's a very flawed system, and I think it also hampers it does hamper. I think player development to a point, but also it benefits it to a point. It depends on your point of view and how you know it's how you would structure that and discuss that. And it's something that a lot of Americans, when they buy into our sports, like in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and you see that academy system and you see that club system where it's very community based. It's not based on the collegiate system. They sometimes struggle to get their head around that. You know, some of these kids have been playing for the same club since the age of 7, or affiliated junior clubs that are affiliated to the senior club and the development structure. They played in their local neighborhood, basically. They've grown up with their teammates. They are fans of the club that they play for, or their family members are. They have a link with the club and the community, and they come through the developmental ranks. And the clubs put a lot of emphasis and funding, and they hire coaches and scouts, and there's a lot of economic investment in the local community where the club is based. You see that in rugby league and AFL, so Aussie rules and rugby league in Australia. Obviously, you see it with association football here in Europe, especially the UK and Germany. I think are prime examples of the club system working rather well. And it's a completely different contrast to North America, and the ownership model is completely different. The league structure is different, although some leagues like the NRL and AFL don't have promotion relegation, and the AFL does have a draft system. The NRL tried to have a draft system; it was challenged in court, but they do have salary cap systems and salary floors and spending constraints. So in some ways, some sports are similar in how they're structured and leagues, but at the same time, the AFL and the NRL still have the local junior base, affiliate clubs, and they bring the players through the system from under sevens all the way through to making your debut at senior level. So I think there's a stronger community link in our sports over the North American system. I think slowly but surely US fans, I think, are really realizing that and the benefits of that. And whether the North American major leagues adopt a more European developmental model, or look at how the European leagues do things, or the European system, because Australia is a bit hybrid because they don't have promotion relegation in Australia and New Zealand. I must stress that. What they do have, though, is that community-based club system. So it's sort of a hybrid. But whether the US looks at the Australian and New Zealand system, which is a hybrid of Europe and North America in regards to no promotion relegation, but you do have your junior base and the club system and affiliate club system, where you develop players within your in-house rather than a draft system, will be interesting. I think that's a possibility that the North American leagues go down in the end. Is sort of a hybrid European Australian kind of professional sports system. And we'll see if that becomes a reality. I think North American sports fans are starting to look at how other countries develop their players, how the clubs are run or the teams are run, because the franchise system's been tried over here and all that. And I think the closest you will get to a North American style is the United Rugby Championship, for example, rugby union. In saying that, they still have youth academies, they still have their developmental systems. There is no draft system. Now, again, we can discuss whether how that would work. I still think that some kind of salary cap system will be brought in for European football. It won't be the traditional salary cap that we think of in the sense of the North American major leagues, but I do think a cap on salaries of some kind will be brought in European club football. It won't necessarily be called a salary cap, but I think it'll be structured in a way that will have to be UEFA led. It can't be domestic league led. I think it needs to be a UEFA rule, and then the domestic league set their cap and their base. I think that's ultimately what happens. I whether when that occurs, we shall see. But I think that's a reality that we could have, and it's a discussion that I think could be had. As I say, the video I did on European football implementing should European football implement a salary cap, which I did 6 years ago, still gets views now, and it does actually get recommended on people's playlists now, which I find amazing. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but I think it's a possibility, and I think the US major league system may adopt a more hybrid European Australian model down the track. I think the NCAA system has a lot of flaws in it, but again, it is what it is. But what is really interesting, I was watching. What was I watching? I was watching something last night when I got in from work about the state of the NBA and the finances, and comparing it to the other major leagues. Now, of course, Major League Baseball has got its ongoing CBA issues, but the NBA, again, the salary cap is going to be less than expected next year, although it's going to be higher than this year when it does. When that does come pass. And so the NBA's salary cap is going up, but less than anticipated. What is interesting when it comes to viewership, golf, the PGA Tour and Augusta and the other majors has a higher average viewership per event than the NBA for broadcast. Golf is more popular with fans in regards to TV viewership in the US than the NBA. So, it's very interesting looking at some of the criticisms that on social media of the NBA and the product they have on the court and the quality of play and how the rules are enforced. It's very interesting. A lot of fans are going, we're switching off. It's just not the same quality as what it was 5 years ago, let alone Chicago Bulls era. I know that the Football League, with Leagues 1 and Leagues 2, the clubs basically said we need a salary cap system to survive. And this was, again, during COVID. This was in 2020. Again, there were discussions being had 6 years ago about how to solve the financial problems of the Football League. And the clubs themselves proposed it. The fact that it was deemed unlawful, I mean, I think if if such an action was brought forward, if the players' union got on side, and this is where I think the PFA have failed. The PFA, the advice they gave during COVID really smacked of not reading the room in regards to what was happening in the wider country as a whole. And it didn't help the stereotypical image of the players. Now, League One and League Two, their salaries aren't massive, although there are some players, because of backloaded contracts, or they've got contracts where they were in the Championship or Premier League, the clubs got relegated and they're in the lower divisions, and they're on big salaries. But that's kind of a bit more of an outlier. But for the most part, the players aren't on massive money in League One and League Two. And the club chairman, the clubs themselves, I think en masse, basically said to the EFL, we need a salary cap. We need to have a salary cap and a salary floor so every team can stay competitive, but that we all survive. And they were the ones driving it. The PFA gave some really, I think, not reading the room advice. They basically told players not to accept pay freezes or deferred payments, or basically escrow. And in the end, Birmingham City led the way with their players meeting the club officials and saying, no, we are going to defer payments. We're going to take a temporary pay freeze or deferred payments. A few other clubs went, yeah, no, this is the right thing to do. We're going to forego some of our salary in the short to medium term so that the non-playing staff at various clubs, I think Birmingham City led the way, can receive their full salaries and be protected and jobs be protected. The PFA advised players against that kind of action. And it was in the aftermath of that League One and League Two, towards the end of 2020, before Christmas, when the Premier League had its ill-fated pay-per-view experiment, they proposed this, and they argued a very good case for it. And then the Championship was offered a bailout by the Premier League because of the loss of games and TV revenue and money worries. And the Championship club said, no, without League One and League Two, we're going to reject your offer for the financial revenue sharing. And that made the Premier League look bad as well. So COVID really exposed football as a sport for the financial mismanagement and the financial greed of some, and the lack of transparency. And the PFA did not come out of that smelling of roses. I think the PFA as an organisation just failed to read the room in the short to medium term, completely failed to read the room. And some of the players, some of their antics off the field damaged football's reputation quite badly. At the time I was talking about these players like Kyle Walker. Great image. Kyle Walker, how many kids has he got now? When you're filming your antics off the field, which may contain some drug misuse, let alone paying of sex workers, and then putting that on your social media accounts and bragging about it, how Kyle Walker continued to not get drugs tested, that stunned me. There's a few other players as well that really did some really stupid stuff in 2020 and 2021 off the field. And we can mention Mason Greenwood in there because we can. There was the incident in Reykjavik with Phil Foden. I think Phil Foden, the tackle, was it last night where he basically got scythed down? That was a proper challenge. And all the commentators go, that's a leg breaker. No, you were Lee Dixon. I said, I'm thinking to myself, Lee Dixon, you were guilty of many of those challenges, and they were deemed perfect. I think the game's going soft. Also, the players, some of the shin pads they wear make my thumb look big. So we need to have minimum shin pad sizes. If they're going to be a compulsory piece of safety equipment that a player has to wear, there has to be a mandatory minimum size, because some of them are little more than a gum shield. So some of them are pathetic teaspoon size shin pads. Not even a youth player would wear them. So I do think some of the players pushing the boundaries of their safety equipment. I think the game, we're losing the physicality from the game. It doesn't help with all the diet. We look, VAR's ruined the spontaneity of the game. So it's all what it is. Oh look, I can't remember the two Derby County players who got done for driving under the influence. But yeah, there was a lot of antics off the field in 2020 and 2021 with players that did nothing to help the image, and the PFA saying to the players, oh, no, don't take pay cuts, demand your full salary. Now, as I say, a couple of clubs and squads really read the room. Birmingham City led the way and I think embarrassed the PFA. In this period, the FA chairman resigned. Was it Greg Clark? A lot was going on at the end of the 2010s, beginning of the 2020s, even before COVID. And I do think, there was a few other players who got up to all sorts. And so the sport hasn't helped itself. And I do think we are seeing a lesser quality product as a result. The 5 substitution rule, we don't need that. We do not need 5 substitutions, but you can only do it in 3 windows. I don't understand that. There is no need to have 5 subs on the bench. VAR is being completely misused. The offside rule needs a radical overhaul. The refereeing standard is absolutely abysmal. And the quality of play, the League Cup final last weekend was shite. Gotta say it as it is. The League Cup final between Arsenal and Man City was absolute dog shit last weekend. It was a crap game. That's my personal opinion on that. Look, at the Europa League final last year, I watched 5 minutes and promptly fell asleep. That's not a good sign when you're talking about big game. This is the concern I have going into the World Cup is the games we're going to see are going to be some of these teams that are making their first World Cups, like your Caracals and Uzbekistans. They're going to park the bus. And then you've got teams like Spain that are going to do their tiki-taka, and I'd rather slip my wrists rather than watch that antiseptic football. I don't think 5 subs does reduce the risk of injuries because you're going to have that fatigue factor where you've got a fresher player on the field against a tired player on the field. I think you're more likely to get injuries, and we've seen that in other sports where you've got this fresh player coming on and the more tired player on the opposition team, or even the same team in a support or a tackling role, gets hurt. We don't need 5 subs. Don't need it. Somehow James Milner has passed Gareth Barry's appearance record and he's played like a full season, 2 full seasons less. Uzbekistan is going to, I would say, no. Eibar look like Barcelona. Uzbekistan, look, no offence to them, but the World Cup is a step up. They are going to park the bus. Plain and simple. They will just have 2 banks of 4, maybe 2 banks of 5, not even play with a out-and-out goal hanging centre forward. They're going to park the bus. It's going to be like Panama, where in 2018, they're going to park the bus. Now, look, as a player and as a coach, that's their prerogative to kick the ball out in there and try and win it. They're going to do what Greece, people were like 2004 when Greece won. They park the bus. They use set plays, and people. Jose Bordalas is the final boss for Rambo. I don't mind, but you see, I don't mind pumping it long and doing a run and scoot and run kind of play where it literally is a couple of passes, get it out, get it quick, get up the other end, smash and grab. I'm not against that. I actually kind of enjoy that, whereby teams are counter-attack based, they do the counter-attack at pace and defend with structure. Not against that at all. Harambe was actually, I think, the preferred way because it's a high energy, committed defence, structured defence, high fitness is required to do it. The players are generally fitter than the tiki-taka players, ironically. What we call Harambe, which is basically just your standard 4-4-2 or 4-5-1 system, or 5-4-1 system, depending on how you want to set up back 4, back 5, and how you set up your midfield. You've got to be actually a fitter player to play that system because you're spending more time without the ball, far fitter player than tiki-taka. You do. Playing without the ball expends more energy than playing with the ball. You've got to be a far more physically fit player to do it. So the fitness side of things, you take a player out of a park the bus handball system, they're going to be fitter. Engine. This is probably why James Milner and Gareth Barry had the careers they did, because of their fitness levels. But you'll see that more often. I kind of miss the kind of run and scoop kind of play off the cut, like, run and gun, as it's called. I wouldn't say sit too deep, but Atletico Madrid on steroids, I think, is the best way to call handball, because Atletico Madrid have got a bit of skill about them. But take Diego Simeone, mix him with Sean Dyche, you get Big Sam Allardyce, or Tony Pulis. Even then, the Stoke teams had a bit of skill about them, and Allardyce's teams, be it Bolton or Blackburn, had a bit of skill about them. But sometimes you need a madman as a coach, and you need a set of players like Ranieri, the Tinkerman. Leicester City were a run and gun team. They were in the Premier League. I think they were the last entertaining team to win the Premier League that actually entertained and took risks and entertained. I kind of prefer that type of play where it's high energy, higher risk. There's less playing safe. It's all about get the ball forward any way you can, and just take shots from all over the place. I think you need that kind of madman, kind of bullish mentality, bull in a china shop. I think you cannot. The game cannot continue to be, because he needs to be entertaining as well as and engaging, as well as you got to win. Unfortunately, I think there's too much analytics, there's too much sports science, and honestly, and I do mean this, honestly, from a spectator standpoint, the game is crap, and I do think VAR has taken some of the enjoyment out of it. We're not seeing players chance their arm with dribbling at players. We're not seeing players chance their arm with technically brilliant shots from distance as much. Teams are trying to score the perfect goal. The goalkeeper's now become the sweeper or floating defensive midfielder, floating defender. Bring back players like David Luiz. We need a David Luiz style. I'm just going to go mad and run with it, and go on a driving run. Take the pressure off the goalkeeper. That's what the sweeper's about. Very few coaches employ a sweeper, which means you don't play the offside trap, but then you're less likely to get caught out by defending too high, because you've got that engine room, Claude Makelele kind of floating, kind of defensive-minded player who's exceptionally fit. He's got a bit of skill about them. So David Luiz. Beckenbauer was the greatest sweeper of all time. I was going to put it out there. De Kaiser. But you need that kind of player. It takes the pressure off the goalkeeper straight away, so the goalkeeper can focus on keeping the ball out of the net. So I think, the amount of money, I think player wages, everyone's trying to copy tiki-taka, which I'd rather just gouge my eyes out. Fans don't like it. So you say the amount of money in the sport. If fans are switching off and you're seeing a lot of negative comments about the state of the game, which are true, there is a lot of frustration. The quality we're seeing now, it's a lot of analytics and sports science based and data based coaching. Coaching by a laptop and a tablet doesn't give you a sense of a player's personality, whether he gets on with his teammates, he has good communication with his teammates, has a good working relationship with his teammates or her teammates, because obviously the women's game has grown massively. I think the women's game is more interesting than the men's at times. It's more entertaining because they're not always equally skilled, but it's fun, it's open. They actually do fly into challenges. They actually hurt each other, which is kind of a warm fuzzy feeling, seeing a kind of a proper challenge. You don't get it in the men's game because VAR's ruined it. And a lot of the diving has ruined it as well. I mean, these are highly paid athletes. Yet they fall down like a sack of shit if someone sneezes near them, let alone touches them. You're saving the amount of money in the sport, but if fans are switching off and complaining about the lack of physicality, the slow-paced possession-based pass and just aimless passing, yeah, but Arteta ball is a bit like Haram ball in a way. Long balls, set pieces, long throws, just with a bit of skill attached, a bit more passing triangles attached because he sort of copies Guardiola, who he used to play for and be an assistant for. But he also used to play for Wenger, who I think at the time was transformational as a coach by bringing in the nutrition aspect, healthier eating, less drinking, trying to stop the players from smoking all the time, trying to make the players a little bit healthier in their diet and their recovery. But then it started to become analytical. And when you're coaching by analytics, I think you've gone too far. You've got to have a bit more personality-based coaching. When you're doing it, basically, it's just Bielsa is the ultimate autistic coach, but he's also a madman. When you're coaching by number crunching and not Moneyball like the Athletics did back in the day, we're talking and the film. But when you're talking like sports science, laptops, data, and when you're doing the training with the bleep meters and the trackers, you listen to ex-players in any sport and they're going, "Oh no, we would have been told to stop because we've been pushed too hard." But we played better as a result, and we had better team chemistry as a result, and we worked harder as a result by not having the analytics and the sports scientists and the data coach. You now have data coaches. And people wonder why Anthony Seibold has been sacked as Seagulls head coach. Well, look how the team's performed under him. And I know it's a different sport, but look how the teams perform under him. It's not working. The players aren't buying in. They're not enjoying the data analytical driven approach to coaching. Players have complained that game plans are overcomplicated. Their private lives are being basically monitored, like their sleep patterns, their dietary, very intrusive. And they felt disconnected. The results kind of bear that out. The performances bear that out, not just the results. And so there is an aspect to this where you could argue that we've gone too far into the AI coaching, tech coaching, sports. Rein it in. Rein it in. We're losing those man managers, those coaches and managers in professional sport who are very, very good at one-to-one coaching and building the relationship with a small group of the squad and going, right, you're going to be my leadership group. You're going to deal with the defence. You're going to be the leader of the defence. You're going to be the leader of the attack. You're the overall captain, and working with a hat that you're core, and then bringing the rest along. I think Tiki Taka, I think, is a moment. But then you could argue the Italian style of the 30s and 40s, where you just suck, and the AC Milan style from the 80s and 90s, where you suck the life out of the opposition and win 1-0 95% of the time, contributed to the 94 World Cup being one of the lowest scoring World Cups in regards to goals per game average that we've seen. But then the goals per game average actually dropped off the last couple of tournaments noticeably from an all-time high. So but then I think it was a Grimsby game recently. They had so much rain it was a mud bath. I went, that's a proper pitch. That's a proper test of endurance, a proper test of being out of your comfort zone and having to adapt to different conditions. I think the pitches now, the players now are mollycoddled. They complain if the grass is 2 millimeters too long. They complain if there's a little worn bit that's like the goal mouth. That's a little bit muddy. We can't play on that. 20 years ago, perfect pitch. Get on with it. The grass is a little bit long. Or the grass is a little bit short. Get on with it. Like a bobbly pitch sometimes with a few little, ruts in it was a perfect pitch because it tested a different aspect of tactics, style of play. You had to adapt. You had to problem solve. Players don't problem solve now for the most part. They when things start going against them, they look at the coach. What do? A good coach would have told his players, if the plan A doesn't work, start problem solving, and we'll figure out a tactical change, which is plan B or plan C. And players look lost if plan A doesn't work. They look at each other. I don't know. Look at the coach, and the coach is like, plan A is not working. Particularly like Arteta, for example, in the League Cup final, plan A didn't work when they were on top in the beginning of the game. Man City's plan A worked in the end because Arsenal's plan A didn't. Neither side had a plan B. It was a terrible final. Terrible final. I'm just going to say it out there. If a left back is scoring both goals, and like the first goal should never been scored because God knows what Kepa was doing. But if a left back scores the only goals in the game, and basically both of them he shouldn't have even been in position to score, tells you that both sides were shit. Haaland did nothing. So all this talk about he could be the greatest goal scorer of all time, Haaland isn't a good player. He's a decent striker in the sense that he can put the ball in the back of the net when you get him the ball in the right area. But other than that, he doesn't do enough 90% of the time. He's just there. He's a body. He can't defend. His movement off the ball at times is non-existent. Absolutely non-existent. Doesn't come deep to look for the ball a lot of the time. He's a passenger for 95% of a game. Did nothing in the League Cup final. Nothing. Again at Wembley. Big final. Does nothing. Doesn't score. Doesn't even. I don't think Haaland had a shot on goal in the League Cup final. He had 6 touches in the first half. Like, what is he contributing apart from size, presence, and he had that one season where he scored a ridiculous number of goals, but still didn't reach Dixie Dean's record. I don't know what, other than having a rocket of a shot and being quite a tall bloke who's quite physical, doesn't do a lot. He's just a good version of Andy Carroll. That's my view on Haaland. He's not a dynamic enough player. He doesn't contribute when he's not scoring. He doesn't contribute to the team when he's not scoring. It tells you quality of football now is shit. In the 90s, if he wasn't scoring and he wasn't contributing, he would have been dropped. He would have been dropped in the 90s. You've got to contribute. You've got to get physical. You've got to get stuck in. You've got to do something when you're not, your primary function isn't working. You've got to help the team. You've got to be a team player. He's just there. Big bloke. I think it's the fear factor that he brought in because he was good in that one season scoring goals. Okay. Fine. And if you don't contribute in the other 95% of the game, what's the point? It's a team game. There's no I in team. This is where I think the modern game is crap. Because that wouldn't have been tolerated necessarily. I mean, that wouldn't have been tolerated necessarily 20 years ago. And a captain, a strong captain, would have basically, the coach, has his plan A, plan B, plan C, has different tactics in his mind. Okay, we're going to play this against this opposition because they're going to be a little bit more in your face or a bit more standoffish, so we can adjust our lineup potentially. So a player might get rotated, and that's fine. Rafa Benitez was very good at that, very astute. The Rafa Benitez rotation policy is always a bit of a joke, but ultimately, Ranieri, the tinker man, he would tinker things if he goes, right, our opposition today is doing this. This is their standard plan A. Okay, we're going to change how we approach. We'll go with plan B. Ferguson, great man manager. Wenger had a few little tactical little things in the back of his, back pocket. Guardiola has no plan B. That's proven. Arteta is a hybrid of Guardiola and I'm going to say Sean Dyche because very reliant on the long ball, very reliant on set plays, very reliant on the long throw, a bit like Tony Pulis, but a younger version. There is no plan B. And so But I don't think Man City has a strong captain at the moment. I don't think they do. Not since Vincent Company. They've not been strongly led since Vincent Company. They might have won a lot, but Vincent Company was a strong captain there. Very dominant figure and a long-term captain there. I don't think you have that manager's lieutenant barking at his underlings, using the captain as a fulcrum to, okay, if things aren't going well, I need you to be a leader. I need the vice captains to back you up. A small leadership group to set the standards. I don't think there's no Vieiras, Keanes. Tim Sherwood was a very good captain. Blackburn was a leader. I just don't see that in the modern game. I couldn't name you any most of the Premier League captains right now, the club captains. Back in the day, I could have named a whole host of them. I all recognised that's a captain. That's the captain. That, I think, is what's lacking in the day's game, is what I call leadership group. Strong leaders who hold the more skillful flair players, the more petulant prima donna players to account and rein in some of their antics a little bit. We're not seeing that. When players are being a bit petulant, like Man United, I think Bruno Fernandes is not captain material. I felt sorry for Harry Maguire. I think it was thrust upon him by previous coaches and he was sort of hung out to dry. I think Ronaldo's petulance, because of the size of his ego and his overrated nature. I mean, Ronaldo and Messi are both overrated, but again, the 90s, I think Messi would have done better in the 90s than Ronaldo. I think Ronaldo, with some of his petulant egomania, I think would have been booted from team to team with more regularity. I think he would have been more of a journeyman. I don't think your Roy Keanes or your Vieiras or Vincent Companies even. I don't think some of the strong captains we've seen over the last 20, 30 years would have tolerated Ronaldo's ego and all about me. He would have been not welcome in many a dressing room. Then again, I don't think he's actually welcome in the Portugal dressing room or some clubs he's played at. I think actually he's alienated a lot of his former teammates with his me kind of petulant mentality. Messi is a bit more of a team player. And I think, would I say he's a captain? Probably not. I think he leads more by example on the field with his skill and his ability. But I think within the Argentina side and the various teams he's played for, I think it was a mistake to make him captain. But I'd have had a different, more understated player in regards to skill and technical ability, and a more of a hard man. I'm the leader, barking at people. But that was again a Pep decision and all these various other things. Harry Kane, I don't see as a captain. While he's a good player, I think he's a bit overrated. I think going to Germany, I think it's helped with his confidence a little bit, and he's actually finally got over that trophy drought he had at Spurs. But then, considering Spurs have only won one trophy in the best part of 2 decades, and then they sack the manager who wins them that trophy, make of that what you will. Very Spursy. I do hope they get relegated this season because I can't stand them. I've got friends who are Spurs fans. I've got work colleagues who are Spurs fans, but the mentality of the club is wrong. The direction of the club, wake the club. I think, well, make of that what you will. I wouldn't say everyone's copying Arteta ball either, because that was proven not to work in the League Cup final. I don't think Kane will play till he's 40. He's had a lot of injuries. I think he retires before then. I think this is his last World Cup. He might go for the next Euros, but I don't think he plays till he's 40. Calvert-Lewin is it Calvert-Lewin DCL? Ollie Watkins? I mean, look, Dominic Calvert-Lewin. It's for those teams that have qualified for the World Cup. These are meaningless friendlies. I know you need warm-up games for the World Cup. I wouldn't say this is the time to do it too far out. I think, again, for those teams that were playing in the playoffs, yes, absolutely, these games mean something. For those teams playing friendlies, like Scotland are playing Japan tonight, like Really? Really? Like, do the Japanese players need that? Do the Scottish players need that? Probably not. Um, you know, really, is that a necessary international during this week before Easter? At the end of March? I don't get how FIFA and then the various confederations have come up with the fixturing, but there you go. The only internationals that should be played right now, in my opinion, are these World Cup playoff matches where for qualifying. They're meaningful internationals. They mean something. They're important. These friendlies, it's like the Nations League. Do you really need them? The Nations League is a reaction to fans and players and coaches, for that matter, basically criticising the friendly format we had before the Nations League. Still haven't bought into the Nations League. Still don't give a fuck about it. I never have. I think it's a pointless thing. It's a reactionary structured system. This is where I think the game is just gone down the crapper for me. What Vincent Company will replace Pep at Man City? I don't know, actually. Man City might not be in the Premier League when Pep leaves because of the charges. Hopefully, God willing, they'll be in League Two and bankrupt. And having to actually, and if Pep says he's going to have to actually coach his way with no money out of a lower league position, that's what we all football fans want. I think a fair few Man City fans from the old Main Road days will go, actually, we've been priced out as fans. Club sold its soul. Yeah, we won success, but at what cost? Spurs Lincoln league match potentially, yes. Yeah, I don't know. That'd be kind of funny. Lincoln City versus Spurs. Spurs away at Lincoln on a cold Wednesday night, Tuesday night. Spurs away against Stoke doesn't have the same ring to it, does it? Because Stoke were a long-term Premier League club, but Spurs away at Lincoln with a potential East Coast fog coming into Southern Lincolnshire. Oh, that's tasty. That is. It's very tasty. The way Lincoln are playing, that's. No, I don't think we'll get relegated, but I can see Bromley slowly working their way up the divisions. Yeah. Although I'm hoping for another Blackburn-Burnley clash next season. But anything's possible in this day and age. Anything is possible. I'm gonna be naughty and have a cigarette inside the flat. I know I shouldn't, but it's fucking cold outside, and I can't be asked to go outside. And I've still got too much left in my fucking drink. Spurs Lincoln is more of a reality than people realise. If Spurs carry on with the form they are exhibiting, I mean, they've got Port Vale in the FA Cup coming up in the quarterfinals. So if they lose to Port Vale, I think Igor Tudor is done. I understand that he's got a track record in regards to clubs threatened with relegation in Italy and across continental Europe. I'm not saying Igor Tudor is a bad manager or anything like that, but he's been thrust into a position after the transfer window shut. You've got to bear that in mind. And at a club where confidence is already low with the player base. The previous manager wasn't there very long, and he inherited a mess from the manager before, who managed to win a trophy, but they narrowly avoid relegation. And the manager before, I mean, this is an ongoing issue that Spurs have been declining for some time. And they were declining before Harry Kane left, and I think they missed their trophy window. Immediately, I know they've won the Europa League last season, but they missed their league window. They missed their Champions League window between 2016 and 2018. That was their window to actually get success. And by that success window being missed, you have to wait another 7 years, win a trophy in one of the worst European finals of all time, but they win a trophy. I'm just going to turn my heater on because it is fucking cold. So you're going to hear a humming noise. That is the electric heater as I've opened the window. I needed some fresh air in here anyway. Caffeine's good. But no, I do stress this. I got 3 facts left. I do stress this. Honestly, and I do mean this. I know I'm having a cigarette inside the flat. I know I shouldn't. Don't do this, kids. Smoking's bad for you. But I think Igor Tudor, I think he gets the sack before the end of the season, which I think would be even more suicidal from Spurs. But I think they get relegated. I think West Ham might actually get out of it. I honestly mean that. I think West Ham potentially, and I do mean potentially, get out of it. I think Nottingham Forest, that defeat of Spurs, I think, is a telling indictment of the situation. And Nottingham Forest have gone through managers like it's going out of fashion. I think Chelsea sacked Leon Brasilia, even though he's on this long-term contract, which is worrying that they actually signed him to that length of deal. I think that's a real possibility. There we go. And I don't know what to make of things at the moment. I really don't. I think football's in a very, very bad place. I really do think football's in a bad place. I just don't understand the logic of some of the owners expecting instant success. As I say, I don't think Igor Tudor is a bad coach. I think it's wrong coach, wrong club. It's a bad situation. I think Thomas Frank did very well at Brentford. But look at Brentford are now. He laid building blocks, put them in place for what they're doing now. It's like Eddie Howe at Newcastle. I think he's getting a bit of a raw deal this season, but Newcastle have got to stay PSR compliant. And by staying PSR compliant, they made a lot of money out of the Champions League this season. Next season, they're going to be more competitive again, ironically. They're sort of one season have a good season, one season have a bad season, good season, bad season. They're going to be one of those teams for a while. Then there's on the rumour mill. Oh fuck! On the rumour mill, there's talk of Zinedine Zidane being linked with the Newcastle job. That'll be interesting. So there's rumour mill that Eddie Howe, this will be his time done at Newcastle. I'm not sure that's fair. He's the first manager to win him a trophy since the 1950s. I don't think his record's that bad. They're having a bit of an off season, but juggling league and European commitments, I think, is the issue. While trying to stay PSR compliant, and that is. That is a problem that a lot of clubs have to juggle is cup competitions with their league commitments. It's very hard, and I don't know what to make of it. Really, I really don't. But I do think where the sport is at right now, it's not a good place. I think actually association football is not as healthy as some would care to or like to admit. I think there are issues, and I think we're reaching a point where, in discussion of potential salary caps and the like, real possibility, right? And I think, as I say, the quality is less now than what it was 20 years ago, 15 years ago. I think the TV rights deal that the FA have signed up with TNT Sports has damaged the image of the sport and made the sport inaccessible at a time when families are finding their budgets squeezed and less available cash. I think putting the European club games behind a paywall has been a very poor move over the last decade. and younger fans are switching off and trying to find more accessible sport. We haven't even discussed F1 and the situation F1 finds itself in with both races in Bahrain and Saudi being cancelled, and the implications for the F1 championship and the quality that we're seeing in F1 with the regulation changes. I think that's very noticeable that with what's happening with Formula One with the new regs, it's gone down badly. The relationship between some of the drivers and the media isn't great. The drivers openly criticising the current regulations as a step backwards, and even though the last regulations weren't great, very noticeable the frustrations within paddock in F1, the quality of F1. I think the regulation changes have been disastrous. I prefer other forms of motorsport over Formula One, and I have done for a very, very long time. Again, noticeable. And looking at it, I think F1 is at crossroads, and the sport is not doing well. I think Liberty Media and the FIA definitely got the season structure wrong, the regulations wrong, and the drivers are reacting as a result. The fans are reacting as a result. We are seeing a lot of negative feeling around Grand Prix racing at the moment. But the fact that the Aston Martin team are using a GP2 engine setup for their cars just tells you where they're at. I think the size of the cars is a worry. So Monaco just becomes a less entertaining race unless the weather intervenes and there's a lot of accidents. I think regulation changes over the last decade haven't been great, and the current set of regulations is. I think April is going to be the month where the F1 teams get some extra testing done and make tweaks to their cars and improve things. I don't like the sprint race format. I think MotoGP is in a similar situation as well. Again, going fully behind a paywall hasn't helped MotoGP, I don't think. And then there's been, you could argue Superbikes and MotoGP are both in a similar situation where they're behind a paywall but less accessible to fans than what they were 10, 15, 20 years ago when they were more accessible to fans. Like your average working class fan of a lot of sports has been priced out, which is not good. The fan experience, I think, has been eroded. And there's a growing frustration with sports fans where they are feeling priced out, that the various sports that we love and enjoy are becoming less accessible. The true fan is being priced out, and then they're going for the casual with disposable income. Sports now are too profit driven. Profits before people, I think, is my saying that I like to use. Profits before people, I think it's a very good saying, actually. And fans are feeling priced out. I wouldn't be surprised that, talking about the World Cup, for example, and ticket prices, I think fans have made their views very, very clear over the last, since September even, but since Christmas. I think football fans have been very critical of FIFA's pricing policy at the World Cup, continue to be critical, and now the media just aren't covering it. But it's become the World Cup in the summer has become highly politicised. I do fear for attendance at the World Cup and the fan experience. I'm not saying that the quality of football will be terrible, but I'm not. I haven't got high hopes in that regard either. But I'm more concerned about empty seats at stadiums, poor fan experience, lack of accessibility for stadiums, which is a known issue in a lot of the US cities, that getting to and from the stadiums is going to be difficult. Public transportation in a lot of US cities is not on the same level as what we see in Europe or other parts of the world. Some fan zones charging entry, that hasn't gone down well. The price of tickets, the price of concessions within stadiums as well, really high. So on an economical standpoint, your average working class fan has been priced out. Your loyal fans who've gone to all the qualifiers and meaningless friendlies in the last World Cup cycle as well, aren't being rewarded for their loyalty. The US domestic fan base and those new fans to the sport, because obviously you want to grow the sport, you want to grow the foundations, you want to get new fans, people interested. Locals in the US especially, but also Canada, have been very critical of the dynamic pricing, feel they're being priced out, and they live in the host cities, or they live in the host province or state, depending if it's Canada or US. They're feeling priced out and not considered, I think, is a good way to look at it. And they're looking at it going, that's a month's wages for a ticket, not interested. I think they made their views very, very clear during the FIFA Club World Cup last summer, which went down like a lead balloon. In the end, the dynamic pricing, I think by the quarterfinal stage, the knockout stages, the organisers were like, we need to slash prices. We need to get fans through the turnstiles and to get at games. They weren't selling tickets. They were struggling to fill stadiums, which was very noticeable. And they panicked and they slashed prices. And even then, they still couldn't fill stadiums. Constant match delays. And then what we're seeing now is we're going to have compulsory water breaks even if we don't reach the temperature threshold. What? Which basically means let's fill these water breaks with adverts. Let's commercialise it even more. And the European fans are not going to truck that. They will switch off. Already the games are being played late at night or evening to really late at night, early hours in the morning. The viewership, I mean, look, I watched all of the Brazil World Cup. I missed a few minutes of a few games, but I didn't mind the evening, late night kickoffs and late finishes. It was a very hot, humid summer here anyway. And 2014, what was I doing? I did a contract job where I earned some big money that summer, but I wasn't working full time the entire summer. I had a fair bit of free time, but I was a lot younger. It's 12 years ago. I was in my mid-20s. Circumstances were different. I had more free time. I watched a lot of the games. I didn't mind the later kickoffs. And it was a very, very humid summer here in the UK. We had a lot of thunderstorms and a lot of hot spells. So sleep at night was difficult at times. It wasn't necessarily always pleasant. So I didn't mind that as much, but I was younger and so you have more energy and you don't mind having more late nights and such. And I felt there was a lot more kind of support for the World Cup, togetherness, even if England didn't do that well. You chose your second favourite nation. I think it was a very enjoyable tournament. Saw a lot of goals, a lot of fun games. A lot of the pubs that I went to were doing World Cup themed things with flags and having beers from the different countries or drinks from the different countries and foods from the different countries. So pubs and restaurants and bars bought into it, and it was an enjoyable tournament. There were obviously some political concerns and security concerns with Brazil, even with the Olympics as well in 2016. There were those concerns around some of the venues and accessibility and security. For the most part, very enjoyable tournament. Very enjoyable tournament. I can't think of too many complaints being had about the 2014 tournament. I think Russia was quite a good tournament. No issues. You could argue the political aspect with Russian politics and what's going on in Eastern Europe now and following the Sochi Olympics 2014. But I didn't think that was a bad World Cup. Qatar for me was middling. Wasn't the best, wasn't the worst. I think on the fan experience, you could argue a bit underwhelming. And there was a fair bit of politics mid-season World Cup as well. Didn't go down well with the European leagues. I think we're still feeling the after effects of that now, coming out of the pandemic. You couldn't have a Qatar World Cup now with what's going on in the Middle East. That is for sure. Very interesting that. Looking at the change in geopolitics in the Middle East over the last couple of years. since the Qatar World Cup. But at the time, I felt it wasn't a terrible World Cup on the whole. Wasn't the best. Again, really, you know, odd kick-off times and mid-season tournament, all that. This World Cup, though, comparisons will be made with '94 and the fan experience 32 years ago, and the quality of games 32 years ago. The weather conditions are basically the same. You're just adding Mexico and Canada to the mix, but Mexico and Canada have hosted World Cups, women's and men's. And more of the concern around Mexico and Canada. Canada is a big country, time zone difference. Mexico is the altitude and the heat factor and the security factor. The US, though, I think with the politics, the geopolitics, the pricing, that's where I think a lot of the issues lie. If Iran do not go, their replacements, the UAE, who are also in the Middle East, and with what's going on there and transport, logistics, and security, that's going to be a hard sell. Considering what's happening with the UAE as a neighbour of Iran. But that's, again, a political discussion. That's a discussion for the other channel. I mean, I have to do some content for the other channel. I do admit I have neglected the history boffin of late. But that is a discussion for the other channel and the geopolitics and what that means for the economy and political decisions taken here and the response to that. With what's happening in the Gulf, which will, I think, also have an impact on costs at the World Cup in regards to travel and, costs in the US and Canada and Mexico in regards to hotels, food, fuel and all that. And that is definitely something that needs to be considered and discussed. But this is definitely, from my mind, Qatar, you could argue there was some politics behind that. And obviously, we know the fallout of the FIFA corruption scandal in regards to the awarding of the World Cup to Qatar. But this is a far more politicised tournament. Now, I was obviously a young kid in '94, so I can't comment on the build-up to the tournament in '94 and discussions about politics and all that. This is not long after the first Gulf War, the '94 World Cup. So there would have been some political discussions by some. But I will say this, the '94 World Cup, I don't think had a lot of negativity in surrounding the build-up. I think it was football was going into this brave new world, the modern satellite TV era. We're talking about the modern Champions League era, the Premier League era, satellite TV era. And the US was the unconquered Everest in regards to as a viewership market, as a fan base. And FIFA were like, well, we need to conquer the US market. And we're going to go here. That was a decision that FIFA took, was we need to break the US sports market. We need to break in. We need to get viewership. The last 3 decades, obviously, fandom, club ownership, investment, the TV deals, you could argue that's impacted the amount of money in the sport and the win at all costs kind of mentality of the sport in a way. And I think the World Cup in '94 was a catalyst for the more globalization of the sport and the change in ownership structures, the change in finance, and FIFA made the decision. I think the European leagues as well and the European associations through UEFA were like, we need to conquer the US North American base, but primarily the US market. We need investment. We want to sell TV deals. We want to get more money in the game. We need more money in the game. We need to have massive infrastructure improvements. We need that kind of influx of cash from across the Atlantic. Now, fast forward all these decades, a whole generation. We're back in going back to the US. And I think this time round there's less optimism. I think a lot has changed. I think we've seen the negative impacts of the American investment and viewership and ownership on the sport. We've definitely seen those impacts. Um, you know, I think that's now being felt. We're seeing a lot of these negative impacts. Look what's happening at Chelsea, for example. Look what's happening at Man United, for example. There's definitely a feeling that the American style ownership model, I'm going to stress this, isn't necessarily always good for the game. I still don't think a lot of American owners fully understand the European club system and spending and history and the community aspect, the working class aspect. I do think that is an unfortunate reality. I think, and it's been, Man United and Chelsea are examples where there's reckless spending, a lot of debt, and I think owners that are very out of touch with fan base and not necessarily very popular. And so that's having a borne out impact on those clubs. It's had an impact on the league and finances of the league. I think a North American ownership success story is Wrexham, and we can argue the pros and cons of that. I think Birmingham City are moving in the right direction as well with their American ownership. But they're obviously not on the same level as your Man Uniteds and your Chelseas. They want to be, but again, PSR rules mean that could be difficult. Obviously, we've seen the plans for a replacement or a rebuild of St Andrews or a new stadium in Birmingham, which I do think is sorely needed. I think St Andrews is life expired as a facility, and I don't think you can do a lot with the current site. So Birmingham City are going to have a new stadium. I think that's a given. I think that will give a massive boost to the city, investment-wise and such. Birmingham is in dire need of something positive to happen as a city. A lot of issues in Birmingham financially, a lot of deprivation. So there can be some positive investment there to turn things around. I think that's a very passionate sporting city. I think it's a very historical sporting city. Wrexham, look at the turnaround there within the city there and the community there and the positive aspects that Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney have had in their ownership of Wrexham, and the turnaround within the community as it is, the investment they've pumped into the stadium and the surrounding area, the change in fortunes at the club from where they were to where they are now. I mean, the first game they were owners was at Maidenhead United. And they took some abuse at Maidenhead United as owners. They really copped it. They loved it. They fully bought into the promotion relegation structure of English football. They have spent a lot of money. They've invested heavily. It's borne fruit. The club is in a very good position. A lot of people are saying, "Oh, look, it's a Netflix document," but the Netflix documentary has really opened the eyes to the workings of European football for a lot of American fans who just follow the big clubs in the Champions League. It really opened their eyes to the lower levels of the game, the pyramid structure of the game, the promotion relegation aspect of the sport in Europe, and how fortunes can turn very, very quickly, and how dynamic the system is. North America, you do crap, get a high draft pick. Tanking is a thing, and it still remains a thing now. Deliberately not putting out your strongest team to try in order to get prospect players. Whereas if you're not good enough in European sport, you get relegated, and that hurts you economically. So there's more incentive to be as successful as possible and stay in the league or improve your league position and finish as high as possible. And that's something you don't have in US sports. You have this franchise model, and it's a flawed model. A lot of American owners who invest in European sports teams, I don't think, fully comprehend the European club model and the promotion relegation. Now, there has been talk that the MLS might go down the potentially bringing in a promotion relegation kind of model, and that they're going to change their league system to a winter league structure and work in parallel with the European leagues, which I think could benefit them. The MLS has grown massively in recent years. There's been a lot of expansion, new clubs, a growing player base, a growing fan base over the last decade. Some big name players have obviously joined the MLS in recent years. European owners are now actively involved with the MLS. They're looking at further expansion. And that is definitely something that needs to be considered in order to continue to make the game, I think, a bit more sustainable and improve the quality. I think that is a talking point. I don't think the MLS is a bad league, but I do think the MLS does face some challenges. Their broadcast deal isn't great. I think that narrows the potential for accessibility. Not everyone has Apple TV, and I think that is an issue that the league needs to figure out is making the sport more accessible for families on TV and more accessible streaming services. Apple TV, I don't think, has worked as a broadcast partner. Not everyone is an Apple consumer. So if you're not an Apple consumer or don't have an Apple TV account, that makes it difficult to view games. And I think that is a potential barrier to the MLS. They've decided to go down the ruthless expansion policy, and you can argue the pros and cons of that on a sustainability level and a quality level. But it's as a participation sport. Association football's grown massively since 1994. There's more youth players now. There's still issues with player development, with a pay-to-play kind of structure, which I think hinders those from less well-off backgrounds, which is a known problem across North America in regards to participation. I think potentially the game could benefit from state leagues, be it youth or senior, and have a kind of state league pyramid structure, which I think could benefit the game. More grassroots clubs being set up and supported. I think that could be a benefit coming out of this World Cup if it's done properly with US soccer and FIFA, if they get it right. I think that's something that I think needs to be considered. Obviously, the '94 World Cup, they got the rights to that, and they hosted it with the goal of having a domestic professional league set up, which they didn't get right, I don't think, initially. I think it should have been set up for the '94, '95 seasons. They didn't start playing until '96. I think that was a mistake, which I think hindered the development of the MLS and the early growth of the MLS and the stability of the MLS early on. They didn't have the right stadium infrastructure early on as well. They were using NFL or collegiate NCAA American football stadiums, which just didn't work for a startup league, which led to large amounts of empty seats and non-capacity games. And it took until David Beckham goes to LA Galaxy for the league to really start establishing a foothold and growing on a more sustainable level and a quality level. I think the current play of the US men's national team is not where I think they hoped it would be at this point. I think they missed the 2018 World Cup, if I remember rightly. They failed to qualify, and that was in the aftermath of winning the rights for the 2026 tournament. They failed to qualify for 2018, and there was a fallout from that. There was frustration from that. The late 90s, early 2000s, the US were rapidly improving. 2018 failed to qualify. Was a shock. They weren't expecting that. I think the US national team has stalled somewhat. Now, Maurizio Pochettino, is he the right guy to bring the US forward and improve them? There's talk that he might return to a European club, be it Spain or Premier League. He's been linked with the Tottenham job on more than one occasion, a return to White Hart Lane. I still call it White Hart Lane, not the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, which still hasn't got naming rights, which is striking after so many years of being an operating stadium, still not having naming rights, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I think they should call it New White Hart Lane. I think that would have gone down better with fans initially and got fans on side quicker with the rebuild and having a new stadium and playing games at Wembley for a couple of seasons. But that's by the by. That was, a Daniel Levy commercial decision, not to find a title sponsor while he was chairman. I think was a massive blunder. I think they're still reeling from that. So there's that to consider. But I think we'll see what happens. I think this World Cup, I do have my reservations about this summer's World Cup and what success it will be or failure it will be, and what we see at the tournament in regards to quality of play, breaking the game up into 4 quarters with ad breaks. It's just not going to go down well with fans. I think the current US administration globally is very polarizing. A lot of people outside the US do not have a high opinion of the US right now. Americans abroad are finding things not pleasant as tourists in some locations. There's definitely a feeling of negativity. Regardless of a US tourist's political persuasion, as soon as it's known they're American, the reception of them abroad does change significantly. A lot of them pretend they're Canadian overseas, and that's a known fact, and that's been a fact for us for some time. But I'm seeing a lot of things on social media where they're shocked at the reaction of locals to them when they're visiting the UK or elsewhere in Europe or Australia or New Zealand. There is definitely a feeling by a significant proportion of people of a negative viewpoint. I think that's feeding into a lot of reservations about this summer's tournament and a lot of negativity surrounding this summer's tournament. We haven't had a ball kicked yet. We haven't had a result yet. We haven't had a game yet. And you see that borne out in media reporting and the headlines. I mean, it's gone a bit quiet on the ticketing price and fan experience concerns and security concerns and the overall experience that fans can expect. But look, we're seeing massive hold-ups at TSA, at immigration check-in, at airports and at border, where travellers are waiting 3 to 6 hours to get through customs. I think that's going to be a massive issue come the summer, unless federal funding is sorted, and that again is a political thing for Congress and the Senate in Washington DC, which is how it's going to have an impact on the sporting spectacle and fan accessibility and travel and these issues. I don't think are going to get resolved in time. TSA staff are being sort of furloughed or on reduced hours. They're not getting overtime. recruitment's dropped off, funding is not there, and there's a lot of political stalemate in the US Capitol in regards to sorting out federal funding, and that's going to have an impact on the sporting experience. So I will do a video on my reservations about the upcoming World Cup, and I do think US customs entering the country in regards to getting through border checks and border controls and the backlog, I think, is going to be a massive issue for overseas fans travelling to the World Cup. Like the NRL Vegas games, they basically advised fans from Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and France, those who were travelling from Europe and Australia, for example, to Vegas, basically not to wear their sports jerseys on the way there. Expect delays getting through customs at, be it LAX or Las Vegas International. I don't know what the Vegas airport's called, but entering the US, expect delays on airline transfers from one airport to another. Expect issues when hiring rental cars, again, because you've got that delay aspect with getting through US customs. You're going to be late for your pickup appointment for a rental that you may have pre-booked. They were basically advising fans that this is a reality. So again, it's going to be very, very interesting in 3 months' time when the World Cup kicks off, if these issues are resolved in time. The visa backlog. So I've got to do another video on my reservations and concerns about the upcoming tournament. I think it'll be very interesting to see what the US response is from US fans, sports fans, about the upcoming World Cup. Are they looking forward to it? Have they got reservations of their own? I think the same could be said from Canada and Mexico for a standpoint on the ticket prices, and local fans have been very critical of the ticketing policy and how the lottery for tickets has worked, and locals' accessibility for tickets. That's been a noticeable concern that fans have had in the build-up to the tournament. And I've seen several sports YouTubers, being highly critical of FIFA's ticketing policies and the ticket prices, and how they, as locals, were really looking forward to their city, be it Vancouver or Toronto or whatever city in the US, being a host city, and they're locals and they want to go see games and they want to experience a global tournament and a World Cup that they're hosting. For many of them, they weren't alive in '94, so they don't know what that was like as an experience as a host nation, and they're feeling priced out. And then obviously there's these obvious concerns over the ongoing political tensions within the US, the issues with TSA and entry into the US have also been mentioned. There's definitely a lot of reservations from a lot of people, I think. I think they are justified concerns from many. I think they're fair concerns. I think they shouldn't be discounted. And it'll be very interesting to see what tournament's like. Now, in saying that, it could be a brilliant tournament, and our fears are misguided, and they pull it off. It's a good positive experience for the local communities that are hosting games, and the overall fan experience is really good. And a lot of our concerns don't come to pass, and we have a really good tournament, good quality football on the pitch, a real positive experience for the fans that will go from overseas, that the concerns in regards to accessibility and transportation and hotels and all that don't come to pass, and that it's enjoyable and the game continues to grow. But at the same time, those reservations are still in place, and some fans are not going to go to the World Cup, and they were planning to, and for a variety of reasons, be it political or economical. So we'll see. But I will do a video on that. I think it's right that we do a video on that and discuss, because the video I did a couple of months ago, I think a fair bit has changed. I think it's gone a bit quiet on the World Cup reporting. So we will see what ends up being the ultimate outcome. The last video I did was, I think, about Iran potentially planning to pull out of the tournament. And the last time we saw a nation pull out of an international football tournament was the former Yugoslavia for the 92 Euros. So that's the last time we saw a nation decide not to go to a major football tournament. We saw a few, I think, in the 80s and 70s as well, over cost and security concerns for political reasons, but they're not on the same. The world's changed massively since the Cold War, so that, I think, was the last time, and that was in living memory that happened. So we'll see if Iran do go. We'll see if, with the visa restrictions on a lot of nations, whether that impacts teams and their fans travelling and families travelling. But there we go. I think I'm going to call that a stream. I've been going for over 2 hours. Some interesting questions. I think it's always interesting to see what people have to ask and the topics we can cover. I think looking at the sports stories to come out the last week or so, obviously a lot happening in the NRL. I think the Anthony Seibold sacking is very interesting. I think the Kieran Foran appointment by the Manly Sea Eagles is very, very interesting. And I've covered both on the channel. And we'll see what happens with Manly's next game, and we'll see if results improve and performances improve with Kieran Foran in charge. I feel he's under a lot of pressure. I don't think it's going to be comfortable for him. I think it's... I hope the Sea Eagles have made the right choice, but there seems to be a bit of dysfunction in the boardroom. In regards to what's happening with these international friendlies and these continuing World Cup qualifiers, I think a lot of these international friendlies are pointless at this stage of the season. It disrupts the league season and adds further miles on the clock for a lot of players. And there's always been this discussion of players are more tired now and they're not getting the recovery time. And these are fair criticisms. The Tiger Woods situation, I'll cover that tomorrow. It's very interesting. This is his 4th DUI he's had in 18 years. There's clearly an issue there. And there's the potential he could face jail time for failure to supply a second sample. At the time, under Florida state law, I think that's up to 60 days jail time, massive fine, and a ban for a year. So he's in legal hot water. I don't think he gets to serve any jail time. If he does, it'll be very limited. But I can see a lengthy driving ban and a heavy fine going Tiger Woods' way. It's a very embarrassing incident. Not the worst accident he's had, but it's a very embarrassing incident. And at this stage in his career, not what's needed, but his private life's been a bit of a car crash, no pun intended, for the last 2 decades. A lot of negative headlines concerning Tiger Woods, away from the sport, outside of the sport, and his public image is definitely not what it was pre-2010, 2011. At this point, he should just hire a chauffeur if he wants to get around. He's got enough money. But he's had a reputational and economic damage with some of his off-course antics. And, of course, the ongoing speculation surrounding the Premier League relegation battle, and a big club is going down this season. Burnley and Wolves, they're done, but I think it's between Tottenham and West Ham. I think Forest are going to get out of it. Spurs, I don't know. It's looking more and more likely with the way they're playing. They are going to go down. I think West Ham will stay up. And I think that would be seismic if Spurs go down. Absolutely seismic. Bigger than Leeds United going down when they did. The Championship is notoriously hard to get promoted back from. It took Leeds 16 years to get back to the Premier League. And they've been a bit of a yo-yo club since. Some clubs have never got back to the Premier League following relegation. Your Swindons, your Bradford Cities, your Hull Cities. It took Ipswich a long time to get back to the top flight. They lasted a season. Luton had one season in the Premier League, but were a top flight team in decades past. Same with Oxford United. Some teams, it takes them generations to get back. So it will be interesting to see what happens if Spurs do get relegated and what that actually means for the club, with their finances and how much that's going to cost them in lost revenue and player exodus. It's a reality. They are in a much worse position than last season, because one of the teams directly below them just has a worse goal difference. That is the only factor keeping Spurs out the bottom three at this point. And they're on their third manager in less than a calendar year. So there's no stability in North London there. So there we go. But yeah, there is the very real possibility that Spurs Lincoln City could be a league match next season, with Lincoln City almost guaranteed promotion from League One. Blackburn Bromley, I mean, the way Bromley are going and the way Blackburn, I think we've had a few positive results in recent weeks since the change of manager. I think Bromley very likely to get promoted to League One, which would be a shot in the arm for that club with their size of the club there. But just imagine if Spurs go down. West Ham have been in the Championship and bounced back up. They've always stayed in the top two flights of English football. Spurs, however, this will be a new experience for a lot of their fans. It's been a long time since Spurs were in the second tier, and that could be absolutely disastrous for Spurs on many levels. Absolutely disastrous, and could be ruinous. So there we go. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll have more content for you all very, very, very soon.